The Valdric's Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for 3,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever refused their demands. Admiral Kethril stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, watching the blue and green world spin slowly on the view screen before him. Earth. They called it such a small world, he thought. Such a young species. The humans had only begun exploring their own solar system, and they had not yet discovered faster than light travel. They were children playing in a sandbox while giants walked among the stars. Transmit the integration decree, Kethril ordered, his forearms folded behind his back in the traditional pose of Valdric's authority. His communications officer bowed low and sent the message that had been sent to 1,700 other worlds. Before this one, the decree was simple and direct: join the Valdric's Galactic Empire as a tributary species. Surrender your government and military forces, and accept the rule of the Eternal Throne. In exchange, you would be allowed to live, refuse, and face complete destruction. No species had ever chosen the second option. The Valdric's had learned long ago that most beings preferred survival over pride, and those few who thought about resisting quickly changed their minds when they saw the size of the Imperial fleet. Kethril expected this would be over within hours. These humans would see his 900 warships blocking out their sun, and they would fall to their knees like every other species before them. He ordered his crew to prepare the administrative documents for Earth's integration into the Empire. He even began drafting his report to the High Council, describing another successful expansion of Valdric's territory. But then something strange happened. Hours passed, and no response came from the planet below. Kethril frowned and ordered the decree transmitted. Again, still nothing. His second-in-command, a young officer named Vethkai, approached with concern in her eyes. Admiral, our sensors are detecting unusual activity on the planet's surface, she reported. What kind of activity? Kethril asked. Military mobilization, sir. But not the kind we usually see, Vethkai said, her voice uncertain. They are not preparing to surrender, and they are not trying to flee. Then what are they doing? They appear to be preparing to fight. Kethril laughed at this ridiculous notion. Fight against the Valdric's Empire with primitive chemical rockets and nuclear weapons that could barely reach their own moon? The idea was absurd. He was still laughing when the human response finally arrived. 17 hours after the decree had been sent, the message appeared on every screen, on every ship in his fleet simultaneously. A feat of hacking that should have been impossible for a species without access to Imperial technology. The message contained only 4 words in bold letters that burned themselves into the memory of every Valdric's who saw them. Come and take it. Kethril stared at those words for a long moment, unable to process what he was seeing in 10,000 years of Valdric's expansion. No species had ever responded to the integration decree with defiance. Some had begged for mercy. Some had offered greater tribute. Some had asked for time to prepare their people for the transition, but none had ever simply refused. They must not understand what they are facing. Kethril said finally, prepare the subjugation armada for planetary assault. The 900 warships of the third expansion fleet moved into attack formation, their weapons charging with enough power to turn the surface of Earth into glass. Kethril gave the order to begin the bombardment, expecting to see human cities vanish under the fire of Imperial plasma cannons. What happened next would be studied by military scholars for centuries to come. The first wave of Valdric ships entered Earth's orbit and immediately came under attack from thousands of small craft that seemed to appear from nowhere. Human fighter jets, primitive things that should not have been able to operate in space, had been modified with jury-rigged systems that let them maneuver in the vacuum. They swarmed around the Valdric's warships like angry insects, and while their weapons could not penetrate Imperial shields, They served as distractions while something far more dangerous moved into position. Kithral watched in horror as hundreds of nuclear missiles, weapons the humans had once pointed at each other, rose from the planet's surface in perfect coordination. The missiles had been modified too, their guidance systems reprogrammed. Using technology the humans had somehow extracted from Valdric's communication signals, they knew exactly where to strike. The first Valdric ship fell when 17 nuclear warheads detonated against its shield generators simultaneously, overloading systems that had been designed to handle attacks from civilized species who fought according to established rules of engagement. The humans had no rules. More ships fell as the humans employed tactics that no sane species would ever consider. They rammed their own aircraft into Valdric sensor arrays, blinding the great warships. They detonated nuclear devices inside their own atmosphere, creating electromagnetic pulses that disrupted Imperial targeting systems. They broadcast false signals that made Valdric ships fire on each other in the confusion, and through it all, they kept coming, wave after wave of humans who seemed to have no fear of death. Cathral ordered a retreat when he realized that his fleet had lost 200 ships in just 3 hours of fighting. He had never retreated before in his long career. He had never needed to, but as he watched his remaining vessels flee from the blue planet, pursued by human ships that should not have been able to match Valdric's speed, he understood that something terrible had happened. The Empire had made a mistake. They had awakened something on that small world, something that had been sleeping for thousands of years, waiting for a reason to rise, and now it was awake. And it was angry, and it was coming for them. None of the ships from the Third Expansion Fleet ever made it back to Valdric's space. The High Council received only one final transmission from Admiral Kethral before his flagship went silent. "They are not like the others," his voice said, broken by static and the sound of explosions. "They do not fight like civilized beings. They fight like they have nothing to lose. They fight like they enjoy it. May the Eternal Throne have mercy on us all, because these humans will not." The transmission ended, and the Valdric's Empire learned for the first time in 3,000 years what it felt like to be afraid and far away on Earth. In a bunker deep beneath a mountain, a group of humans in military uniforms stood around a table covered with star charts. They had stolen from Valdric systems. They had won the first battle, but they knew the war was just beginning. A woman with gray hair and cold eyes looked at her colleagues and spoke the words that would become the founding principle of a new organization called Terran Command. "They came to our world and threatened to kill everyone we love," she said. "Now we will make them regret that decision for the rest of their existence." The others nodded in agreement. Humanity had been given a choice between submission and extinction. They had chosen a third option, that the Valdrics had never considered: revenge. The news of the Third Expansion Fleet's destruction spread through the Valdric's Empire like a disease, infecting every world with doubt and fear. For the first time in 3,000 years, the subjects of the Eternal Throne began to whisper questions that had never been asked before. If these humans could destroy an entire fleet, what else could they do? If one species could resist the Empire, could others do the same? Emperor Valdric XVI ordered his intelligence services to discover everything they could about the beings who had humiliated his military. Hundreds of spies were sent to the outer regions of the galaxy, ordered to observe the humans without being detected. What they learned made the Imperial Court tremble. The humans, it turned out, were not like any species the Empire had ever encountered. Most civilizations in the galaxy had evolved toward cooperation and peace. The gentle Valdrics had developed telepathic bonds that allowed them to share thoughts and emotions. making war between their kind almost unthinkable. The Silith, one of the oldest conquered species, had achieved unity through a biological hive mind that connected every individual to a greater whole. Even the aggressive Kavathi had established strict codes of honor that limited the destruction of warfare, but humans had no telepathy, no hive mind, no codes of honor. They had spent their entire existence fighting each other. Their history was an endless record of wars and conflicts, of empires rising and falling, of weapons growing ever more deadly. They had split the atom not for energy but for destruction. And they had pointed those atomic weapons at their own cities, at their own children. The Valdrix analysts who studied human history could not understand how the species had survived long enough to reach the stars. They seemed designed for self-destruction. But then the analysts looked deeper, and they began to understand the terrible truth. The constant warfare had not weakened humanity, it had made them strong. Every generation of humans had faced threats that should have ended their civilization, and every generation had adapted, evolved, and overcome. They were not fragile like the Valdrix, who had known peace for millennia. They were hard, forged in the fire of endless conflict, and they had developed abilities that peaceful species could never match. When the Valdrix fleet appeared in their sky, the humans had not panicked. They had simply turned their weapons in a new direction. Ancient enemies had become allies within hours of the integration. Decree nations that had spent decades threatening nuclear war against each other suddenly shared their arsenals, their technology, their secret scientists who had competed. Their entire careers began working together with perfect efficiency military forces that had trained to fight each other, combined into a single, unified command structure. The humans called this new organization Terran Command, and it operated with a speed and flexibility that the rigid hierarchy of the Valdrix Empire could never match. The Empire's spies reported that Terran Command had already begun reverse engineering the technology from captured Valdrix ships. They had taken apart the weapons, the engines, the communication systems, and they were learning how everything worked within months. Human factories were producing crude copies of Valdrix equipment within a year. Those copies were being improved and modified in ways that Valdrix engineers had never imagined. The humans had a term for their approach to warfare that the translators struggled to render in the Valdrix language. They called it proportional response +1. If you hurt them, they would hurt you back worse. If you killed one of them, they would kill 10 of you. If you threatened their world, they would find your world and make you regret it. Emperor Valdrix 16 read the intelligence reports with growing horror. He had expected the humans to be crushed easily, but instead they were growing stronger every day. Something had to be done before they became too powerful to stop. The Emperor called a meeting of his highest military commanders and demanded a plan to destroy Earth once and for all. Grand Marshal Dexnal, the most decorated officer in the Imperial fleet, proposed a massive invasion using ships from every corner of the Empire. We will gather 20,000 warships, Dexnal said, the largest fleet ever assembled in Valdrix history, and we will burn that planet until nothing remains. The Emperor approved the plan immediately, but gathering such a force took time, and the humans did not sit idle while the Empire prepared. Terran Command had captured enough Valdrix technology to understand how faster-than-light travel worked, and their best scientists were working day and night to build their own FTL engines. 3 years after the first Valdrix fleet arrived at Earth, a human ship called the Pioneer made the first successful jump to another star system within 5 more years. Terran Command had a fleet of 100 FTL-capable warships. They were ugly vessels compared to the elegant Valdrix cruisers, all hard angles and exposed weapons. and heavy armor. They looked like machines built for war by a species that truly understood what war meant. And then the humans began to explore. They visited the worlds that the Empire had conquered, and they offered those worlds something that no one had ever offered them before: freedom. The Rilthani were the first to accept the human offer. They were an aquatic species, brilliant engineers who had been forced to build Valdric's shipyards for 600 years. When human ambassadors arrived on their world and offered to help them overthrow their Valdric's governors, the Rilthani agreed without hesitation. The revolution was swift and bloody. Valdric's garrison never expected an attack from the species they had enslaved for so long, and they certainly never expected the humans who dropped from the sky to fight alongside the Rilthani rebels within a week. The Rilthani homeworld was free, and then the news spread to other conquered worlds. The Kolvati heard about the Rilthani liberation and sent secret messages to Terran command, asking for help. The beings of the Ash Nebula, a species so thoroughly broken by Valdric's rule that they had forgotten their own name, begged the humans to save them. One by one, worlds began to rise against the Empire, and at the center of every rebellion, there were humans. They taught the conquered species how to fight. They shared their weapons and their tactics. They bled alongside their new allies and celebrated alongside them when victory was won. The Valdric's Empire had made countless enemies during its 3,000 years of conquest. Now those enemies had found a leader. Terran command established a new organization to coordinate the growing alliance. They called it the Coalition of Free Worlds, and its founding document was simple: no species will be enslaved while we draw breath. High Marshal Elena Vasquez, the woman who had led Terran command since its founding, gave a speech that was broadcast across 1,000 worlds. "The Empire calls us young," she said. "They call us reckless and savage and dangerous. And they are right about all of those things. We are young, but we learn fast. We are reckless, but we win. We are savage when we need to be, because we know what happens to the gentle and the peaceful in this galaxy. And we are dangerous because we remember what it felt like to be powerless, to look up at the sky and see doom coming down toward us. We will never let another species feel that fear while we have the strength to prevent it. Join us and be free. Stand against us and learn why the Valdric's Empire fears the name of Earth." The coalition grew stronger every month, and in the heart of the Valdric's Empire, the Eternal Throne began to understand that this was no longer a simple matter of crushing a rebellion. This was a war for survival. The humans had done something no one in 3,000 years had managed to do. They had given the galaxy hope, and hope, as the Valdric's were about to learn, was the most dangerous weapon of all. 20 years had passed since the first Valdric's fleet arrived at Earth, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Coalition of Free Worlds now stretched across hundreds of star systems, a patchwork of liberated planets bound together by a single promise: no more slavery, no more fear. High Marshal Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the Coalition flagship, the TCS Unity, watching a formation of warships move past the viewport. There were human vessels in the formation, but there were also Rilthani cruisers with their distinctive blue hulls, Kolvathi battleships bristling with close combat weapons, and dozens of other designs from species that had been conquered by the Valdric's and then freed by the Coalition. It was a beautiful sight. Vasquez thought, 20 years ago, these species had been enemies or strangers or slaves. Now they were allies, united against a common threat. The journey to this moment had not been easy. The Valdric's Empire had not accepted the loss of its territory without a fight. Dozens of battles had been fought across the galaxy. Some won and some lost, and thousands of humans had given their lives to protect worlds they had never seen before. But the Coalition had grown stronger with every battle. While the Empire had grown weaker, the conquered species had provided not just soldiers, but knowledge, technology, and resources that Earth alone could never have produced. Rilthani had shared their expertise in shipbuilding, allowing the Coalition to construct vessels faster and better than ever before. The Kolvathi had trained human soldiers in close-quarters combat, turning already dangerous warriors into something truly terrifying. The beings of the Ash Nebula, who had finally remembered their true name was the Nethrani, had contributed their understanding of energy shields and defensive systems, and humanity had provided something that none of the other species could offer. Hope Vasquez remembered what the galaxy had been like when she was young. Before the Valdrix came to Earth, the conquered species have lived in despair, believing that the Empire would rule forever. They had forgotten what it meant to be free, forgotten that they could fight back. But then the humans had arrived, loud and reckless and impossible to ignore. They had shown the galaxy that the Valdrix could be beaten. They had proven that one species standing alone could make a difference. And now, 20 years later, the galaxy was waking up. A young officer approached Vasquez with a data tablet in her hands. "Hi, Marshal. We have received a priority message from our intelligence network," the officer said. "The Valdrix are mobilizing something called the Celestial Hammer." Vasquez felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard that name before in captured Valdrix documents. The Celestial Hammer was a planet killer, a weapon so powerful that it could destroy an entire world with a single shot. The Empire had used it only twice in their long history, both times to end wars by eliminating the enemy's homeworld completely. "What is the target?" Vasquez asked, already knowing the answer. "Earth." "Hi, Marshal." Vasquez closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that information settle over her. The Empire was done playing games. They were going to destroy humanity's homeworld, the birthplace of every human who had ever lived, the symbol of everything the Coalition stood for. If Earth fell, the Coalition might survive, but it would never be the same. The hope that humanity represented would die with their planet. Vasquez opened her eyes and looked at the young officer. "Call a meeting of all fleet commanders," she ordered. "We have work to do." The meeting took place in the war room of the Unity, a circular chamber surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of every known fleet in the galaxy. Representatives from every Coalition species were present, either in person or via real-time communication. Lynx Vasquez explained the situation quickly and clearly. The Celestial Hammer was being assembled at a shipyard deep in Valdrix space. It would be escorted by the largest fleet the Empire had ever gathered, more than 12,000 warships. The weapon would travel through a narrow corridor of stable space called the Threshold, the only safe FTL route between the Empire's core and human territory. If the hammer passed through the threshold, nothing could stop it from reaching Earth. Admiral Crickstale of the Rilthani was the first to speak. "We cannot allow this weapon to reach its destination," she said, her voice translated by the chamber's universal communication system. "But we do not have the ships to match 12,000 Valdrix warships. How many ships can we gather?" Vasquez asked. The numbers were calculated quickly. The Coalition could assemble approximately 4,000 vessels if every available ship was called to the battle against 12,000 Valdrix warships. Those were terrible odds. General Morthan of the Kolvathi slammed his fist against the table, a gesture of frustration in his species. 4,000 against 12,000, he growled. "This is not a battle. This is a sacrifice." "Then we will sacrifice," said a quiet voice from the corner of the room. Everyone turned to look at Captain James Chun, commander of the TC's Defiance, the oldest FTL fully young human fleet. The Defiance had been the first human vessel to travel faster than light, and it had served in every major engagement. Its hull was scarred with the marks of 100 battles, but it still flew, still fought. still refuse to die. Earth is more than just a planet, Chun continued. It is a symbol, a promise that we made to every species in this coalition. We told them that we would never let anyone threaten their worlds while we had the strength to prevent it. If we cannot protect our own homeworld, that promise means nothing. So we will fight. Even if the odds are against us, we will make the Empire pay for every meter of space they cross. And if we fall, we will fall knowing that we did everything we could. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, the representatives of every coalition species rose to their feet. Admiral Crixtel of the Rilthany spoke first. The humans saved my world when they had nothing to gain from doing so, she said. We will stand with them now. General Morthan of the Corvate nodded his massive head. The Corvate do not abandon allies, he declared. We will fight. The Nethrani representative, a being of light and shadow that floated above its chair, added its voice to the chorus. We were slaves for 6,000 years before the humans came, it said. We will not let that darkness return. One by one, every species in the coalition pledged their support. 4,000 ships against 12,000. The odds had not changed. But something else had. The coalition had remembered why it existed, not for territory or resources or power, for freedom, for hope for each other. Vasquez looked at her allies, her friends, the beings who had chosen to stand beside humanity, even knowing that many of them would not survive. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Then we are agreed, she said. The coalition fleet will meet the celestial hammer at the threshold. We will stop that weapon, no matter the cost. And if the Valdrix Empire wants to destroy Earth, they will have to go through all of us first. The war room erupted in cheers and battle cries from a dozen different species, and somewhere in the depths of Valdrix space, the celestial hammer began its journey toward the threshold, toward Earth, toward the greatest battle the galaxy had ever seen. The threshold was a narrow corridor of stable space, a natural pathway through the chaotic energy fields that made faster-than-light travel so dangerous for millions of years. It had been nothing more than an astronomical curiosity. Now it was about to become the site of the largest battle in galactic history. Marshal Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the TCS Unity, watching the coalition fleet assemble before her. 4,000 ships from 47 different species hung in the darkness of space, their lights blinking like stars. Against the endless blanket was the largest force the coalition had ever gathered in one place. It was still not enough. The Valdrix fleet emerged from hyperspace on the far side of the threshold, and Vasquez felt her heart grow cold at the sight. 12,000 warships, arranged in perfect formation around the massive bulk of the celestial hammer. The planet killer was larger than any vessel Vasquez had ever seen. A mountain of metal and energy weapons that seemed to swallow the light around it. Its primary cannon alone was longer than most coalition battleships. If that weapon fired on Earth, nothing would survive. All ships. This is High Marshal Vasquez, she broadcast across the fleet's communication network. We know why we are here, and we know what we face. The enemy has more ships than we do, more weapons, more resources, but they are fighting to maintain an empire built on slavery and fear. We are fighting for something worth dying for. Today, we prove to the galaxy that freedom is not just a word. Today, we show the Valdrix Empire what happens when they threaten our home. For Earth, for the Coalition, for every being who ever dreamed of being free. Attack! The Coalition fleet surged forward, and the Battle of the Threshold began. First hours of the fighting were a nightmare of fire and destruction. Valdrix plasma cannons tore through Coalition shields, leaving burning wrecks floating in the void. Coalition weapons answered back, ripping apart enemy escorts and clearing paths toward the celestial hammer. Ships died by the dozens on both sides. their crews never knowing if their sacrifice made any difference. Captain James Chun commanded the Defiance from the front lines, leading a squadron of human and Rilfini vessels directly into the heart of the Valdrix formation. His ship took hit after hit, its ancient hull groaning under the strain, but it kept flying, kept fighting, kept pushing forward. "Target their command ships," Chun ordered. "Cut off the head, and the body will falter." The Defiance and her squadron broke through the outer defensive line and reached the Valdrix command carrier, a massive vessel that coordinated the movements of hundreds of other ships. Chen's weapons officers fired everything they had, overwhelming the carrier's shields and destroying its bridge. The Valdrix formation wavered as orders stopped coming, and coalition ships poured through the gap. But the Empire had not survived for 3,000 years by being weak. New orders came from other command ships, and the Valdrix fleet reorganized with terrifying speed. Counterattacks pushed the coalition back, and for every enemy ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. By the end of the first day, the coalition had lost 800 ships. The Valdrix had lost more than 1,000. But they could afford the losses. The coalition could not. Admiral Krigstal of the Rilfini led her engineering squadron in a desperate gambit on the second day. Her ships were not meant for direct combat, but they carried powerful reactor cores that could be overloaded to create massive explosions. Grix ordered her crews to evacuate to escape pods, then aimed their empty ships at the densest concentrations of Valdrix vessels. The resulting explosions destroyed more than 200 enemy ships in a single moment. Krextel herself stayed behind to coordinate the attack, her own ship the last to detonate. Her final words were broadcast across the entire coalition fleet: "Tell the humans it was an honor to fight beside them." The third day saw the Kovathi warriors prove their reputation as the deadliest close combat fighters in the galaxy. General Morthan led boarding parties onto damaged Valdrix ships, fighting hand to claw through corridors filled with smoke and fire. The Kovathi captured 7 enemy vessels and turned their weapons against their former masters, but Morthan fell during the assault on the 8th ship, his body pulled from the wreckage by his soldiers. They carried him back to a coalition medical ship, but the doctors could do nothing. The general died with his weapons still in his hands, a smile on his face. The 4th and 5th days blurred together in an endless storm of combat ships that had been allies for years died defending each other. Crews that had served together since the founding of the coalition sacrificed themselves to buy time for their friends, the Nethrani, beings of light who had once been slaves, threw their fragile vessels into the path of torpedoes meant for human carriers. Young human pilots, some barely old enough to be called adults, flew missions they knew they would not return from, and still the Celestial Hammer advanced, its escorts falling one by one, but its hull remaining intact by the 6th day. The coalition had lost more than 2,000 ships. Fewer than 2,000 remained operational, many of them damaged beyond full repair. The Valdrix fleet had been reduced to 6,000 vessels, but they were still overwhelming in number, and the Celestial Hammer was halfway through the threshold on the 7th day. Vasquez made a decision that she had hoped she would never have to make. She called Captain Chun to the Bridge of the Unity for a private conversation. Chun arrived looking exhausted, his uniform torn and stained with smoke, but his eyes were still bright with the fire that had driven him since the war began. "James," Vasquez said, using his first name for the first time in years, "the hammer will reach firing range within 2 days. Our weapons cannot penetrate its shields, but if a ship were to impact its primary weapon array at FDL speeds, the resulting explosion might be enough to disable it." Chun understood immediately what she was asking. "The Defiance is the fastest ship in the fleet," he said quietly, "and my crew knows this ship better than anyone. I am asking you to die." "James, you are asking me to save Earth," Chun replied. "That is a fair trade." Chun returned to the Defiance and explained the situation to his crew. Any who wished to leave would be transferred to other ships with no shame attached. Not a single person left in the 8th day. The Defiance made its final run. The old ship pushed through lines of Valdric's escorts. Taking fire from all directions, its shields failed within minutes, and its hull began to buckle under the assault, but it kept accelerating, faster and faster, aiming directly at the Celestial Hammer's primary cannon. Chun's last transmission reached the Unity just before impact. "It has been an honor, High Marshal. Tell them we did our duty." The Defiance struck the Celestial Hammer at speeds that should not have been possible. Explosion created a new nebula, a cloud of light and energy that could be seen across the entire threshold. When the light faded, the Celestial Hammer was still there, but its primary weapon was gone. Torn away by the impact, it could not fire. It could not destroy Earth. The remaining coalition ships, fewer than 600 now, surrounded the crippled planet killer and demanded surrender. For the first time in 10,000 years, a Valdric's flagship lowered its colors and submitted to an enemy. The Battle of the Threshold was over. The coalition had won, but the cost had been terrible beyond measure. 3,400 ships destroyed, millions of lives lost, and the war was not over yet. 3 years passed after the Battle of the Threshold, and the galaxy continued to change. The Valdric's Empire, which had ruled unopposed for 3,000 years, crumbled at its edges as more and more worlds joined the coalition of free worlds, species that had been conquered for centuries. Remember what it felt like to be free, and they were not willing to give that feeling up. The Empire tried to fight back, sending fleets to reclaim lost territory. But their defeats only encouraged more rebellions. Every world that fell to the coalition weakened the Valdric's. Further, every species that joined the alliance made humanity stronger. High Marshal Elena Vasquez had aged greatly in the years since the war began. Her hair was white now, and her face was lined with the weight of decisions that had cost millions of lives. But her eyes were still sharp, and her voice still carried the authority that had guided humanity through its darkest hours. She stood in the conference room of a space station orbiting Earth's moon, looking out at the blue planet that had been saved by so much sacrifice in a few minutes. Representatives of the Valdric's Empire would arrive to negotiate the end of the war. Vasquez knew what they would expect. They would offer territorial concessions. Perhaps some of the worlds they had taken in the early years of the conflict. They would agree to tribute payments, resources transferred from their treasury to the coalition. They might even accept a formal apology, a public acknowledgement of their crimes, broadcast across the galaxy. That was how wars usually ended, with the winner taking what they could and the loser keeping what remained. But Vasquez had no intention of following the usual pattern. The Valdric's delegation entered the room with the dignity of beings who had ruled an empire for millennia. There were 7 of them, tall and elegant, their forearms folded in traditional poses of authority. The lead negotiator was named Vexvol, a descendant of the Grand Marshal, who had first proposed a massive invasion that led to the construction of the Celestial Hammer. His ancestor had died in that invasion. Vexvol himself had lost 2 of his children in the wars that followed. Behind Vasquez stood ambassadors from 47 species, all former subjects of the Empire, all now free. They represented the Rilthani and the Kovathi and the Nethrani, and dozens of others who had joined the coalition over the past 2 decades. They were there to witness what was about to happen. Thexacle spoke first, his voice translated by the station's communication system. "We have come to negotiate terms of peace," he said. "The Empire recognizes that this conflict has been costly for both sides, and we are prepared to make reasonable concessions to end the bloodshed." Vasquez did not respond immediately. Instead, She slid a single document across the table toward the Valdrix delegation. Taxaval picked it up and began to read, his bioluminescent skin flickering through colors that indicated confusion, then disbelief, then outrage. "This is not a peace treaty," he said finally. "No," Vasquez agreed. "It is not." The document did not demand territorial concessions or tribute payments or public apologies. Instead, it established a single permanent boundary, a line in space that divided the galaxy in two. On one side would be the Valdrix Empire. Whatever remained of it on the other side would be the coalition of free worlds, the former slave planets, human space, and the territories of every species that had chosen freedom over submission. The boundary would be closed forever. No Valdric vessel would be permitted to cross it, not for trade, not for diplomacy, not for any reason at all. The final clause was the one that made Dexval's skin flush with colors of rage. "The Valdrix Galactic Empire is hereby ordered to close its border to all coalition space," he read aloud. "This closure is permanent. There will be no trade, no diplomacy, no contact of any kind. You will not speak to us. You will not look at us. You will forget we exist. And we will forget you, until and unless you threaten anyone under our protection again. Should that day come, we will not stop at your border." Vexful looked up from the document, his eyes burning with fury. "You would isolate us?" he demanded. "You would pretend that an empire of 40,000 star systems does not exist?" Vasquez leaned forward in her chair, and her voice was cold as the void between stars. "You came to our world uninvited," she said. "You threatened to murder every human being alive. You have enslaved thousands of species for 3,000 years. Stripped them of their cultures, their histories, their names. And now you ask for dialogue?" She shook her head slowly. "No. You had your chance to be neighbors. You chose to be tyrants. So now you get to be nothing." The room was silent for a long moment. Thaxful looked at the document, then at the representatives of the species his empire had conquered, then at the human woman who had defeated the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. He understood, perhaps for the first time, what the humans had really done. They had not just beaten the Empire in battle. They had made the Empire irrelevant. "If we refused to sign?" he asked. Vasquez smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Then we continue the war until there is no Empire left to refuse anything." Deshval signed the document in the years that followed. The coalition grew into something the galaxy had never seen before. It was not an empire. Because no species ruled over any other, it was not an alliance. Because it asked for no tribute and demanded no loyalty beyond a simple commitment to freedom, it was a federation of equals. Hundreds of worlds working together because they chose to. Because they remembered what slavery felt like and never wanted to feel it again. Humanity became the anchor of this federation. Not because they were the strongest or the wisest or the most advanced. They became the anchor because they had been the first to stand up, the first to say no, the first to prove that the Valdrix could be beaten. They had given the galaxy hope, and hope, it turned out, was enough to change everything on the edge of coalition space. Automated defense stations maintained an eternal vigil along the closed border. They broadcast a message in every known language, a warning that repeated on a loop that would continue until the stars burned out. "This is Terran Command. The border is closed. Do not attempt contact. Do not approach. You are not welcome. Here, humanity remembers. Far away, in the heart of what remained of the Valdrix Empire, the former masters of the galaxy lived in isolation. They had their worlds and their ships and their technology. But they had lost something they could never recover. They had lost their place in the story of the galaxy. Future belonged to the free, and somewhere on Earth, in a museum dedicated to the heroes of the war, there was a display case containing the last transmission ever received from the TCS. Defiance Captain James Chun's words glowed in soft light. read by millions of visitors every year. It has been an honor, High Marshal. Tell them we did our duty. Below those words was a plaque that bore the motto of Terran Command, the words that had guided humanity through its transformation, from a single frightened world to the leaders of a galactic federation. We remember what it felt like to be powerless. We will never let anyone feel that way while we have the strength to prevent it. This is our promise. This is our duty. This is who we are. And the galaxy, for the first time in 3,000 years, knew peace.